Good morning. My name is Kara Corbin-Lickfit, and it is my privilege to serve as your worship associate today. The theme for September has been resilience. And when I told my husband, Jay, he said, I have a book for you. He said the book was The Resilient Spirit by Eileen McDarr. And it was given to him by a boss of his at Procter & Gamble when he left Cincinnati to move here to Orange County. And this was the first time I'd seen it. So we've had it a while. The first page asks the question, how do you stay right side up in a world that seems upside down? A world that shrinks 1 minute in global consequences and expands the next with seemingly impossible demands. 1 minute we know all the answers, the next minute the questions have changed. We all face the dilemma of living in a sped up, broken apart, too fast world. A world in which some of us have downsized, right-sized, capsized. A world in which what is out is in and what is in is out. Where borders are blurred, roles are reversed, and security is suspect. A resilient spirit. That's what it takes to navigate this world of whitewater change resiliency. Resilience is finding the reason to keep on keeping on. It's understanding that the word no does not mean never. It is knowing you can find another way, another day, another time. And it's in believing you belong on this earth with gifts to give, and nothing and nobody will stop you. That's the first page. And then it goes on to describe, it's kind of in a journal way, ways to find your own resilient spirit. So it gives examples of changing your focus, using your brain, your heart, asking for help, all of these things to help you find your resilient spirit. Expecting the difficult, learn optimism, etc. One short chapter in there that I wanted to share emphasizes the importance of becoming the change you wish to see. It says, the mind has tremendous power. It talks about the results of a 1979 study conducted by the Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer. For 1 week, Langer and her team observed and tested a group of men aged 75 and older who were invited to a week's retreat in a resort. What made the project unusual was that everything the men read or saw was dated no later than 1959, so 20 years before. The purpose of the retreat was to change the context of these men's lives, in short, to place them in a past life. All the men were asked to talk and refer to events and each other as if truly it was 1959. The experimenters even asked the men to wear ID photos taken 20 years earlier. A second group, I found this out after I read some more detail in the study, a second group, which was the control group, arrived the week afterward and were told to stay in the present but simply reminisce about the era of 1959. So even though the men were pretending, the results were remarkable. So pre and post exams indicated that the men who acted as if they were 20 years younger improved in manual dexterity, memory, self-sufficiency, and activity. Measurements of finger length that often shortens with age determined that the fingers had lengthened. Measured hand grips showed an increase in muscle strength, and there was an improvement of hearing and vision. Those were the ones I was like, I'm not sure how that works exactly, but even pretending to believe changed the outcome. So Dr. Langer recently gave a lecture where she talked about this study that was very early in her career at Harvard. She said, at the end of the study, I was playing football, touch, but still football, with these men, some of whom gave up their canes. It is not our physical state that limits us, she explains. It's our mindset about our own limits, our perceptions, that draws the line in the sand. Believing or even pretending to believe makes it so. There's an article online that she gave about this study 30 years ago, and she talks about where her research has gone then. It's completely changed the psychology of aging for that. So we come together in community, supporting and encouraging each other on our spiritual journeys, affirming the importance not only of tolerance, but of acceptance, compassion, and open-mindedness. Welcome to Tapestry, a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Our minister, the Reverend Kent Doss, is in the pulpit today. Your worship associates are thrilled. He has been on a 3-month sabbatical, and we are thrilled to have you back. Would you please now take a moment to turn off your mobile phones or other devices that might be disruptive to our worship time together. We are a welcoming congregation, and we extend a warm greeting to any newcomers. We invite those of you who are visiting for the first or second time, if you are comfortable doing so, to please stand and introduce yourself so that we have the opportunity to get to know you. Do we have any visitors today? And I encourage the people from the back to please come find a seat. This will be a great time. There's lots of space up here in the first and second rows. So do we have any visitors this morning that are brave? You? Welcome. If you are new, we invite you to stop by the greeters table to pick up information about our faith and our congregation. We invite everyone to please join us after the service for conversation and refreshments served out on the patio. If you have been coming for a while but are not yet a member and feel you have found a home with us, please talk to the minister or someone at the greeters table about becoming one. And now please extend a greeting to those sitting near you. So for announcements, we have some exciting events going on today and also coming up. So today is Water Conservation Sunday, and I hope that you will visit the Green Sanctuary Water Conservation and Drought Tolerant Plant Exchange that's set up outside. Also, there are still some spaces available for our retreat at Camp Devenaville coming up on October 7th. Please sign up today if you're interested in taking one of these spots, and you can talk to Laura Jackson over here if you have any questions. If you have already signed up, please pay your remaining balance ASAP today. That's coming up really quickly. As part of our committee introductions, today you will hear from Eddie Moeller, our Vice President of Finance and Chair of the Finance and Stewardship Committee. He will talk to us about some of their activities.
Good morning. So I'm Eddie Moeller. As you said, I'm VP of Finance and Chair of the Finance Committee, as well as the Stewardship Committee. I'm still transitioning into this role, and I'm very grateful to Julie, who's sitting out here in the front row, for her, as my predecessor, helping me into this. It's an interesting time from a finance point of view, but I know that's not the best way to begin a worship service, so I'll be really brief. With the capital campaign going on, there's a lot of focus on getting our financial accounting and organizational structure tightened up as we learn kind of what the requirements are from the various points of view of lenders and things like that. The other flip side of the coin, of course, is for the finance related is the fundraisers and the annual stewardship pledge drive. So the Stewardship Committee is responsible for planning and carrying out the annual pledge drive. I'm hoping this year to form more of a committee. We'll be meeting probably first time in late November or in December sometime, just to get our thoughts flowing and to sort of form as a group. If you're interested in the stewardship campaign and contributing in that way, I'd love to hear from you. And basically, we kind of run from December through April is our most active time, and then we're in a lull until the next year's campaign, and we focus on other things. But that's a really great activity. It's an important one, and I certainly would welcome anyone who's interested in that. But enough of the recruiting stuff. The last thing I guess I'd like to leave you with is that the Finance Committee, like I said, as it's started to, as we've reached this kind of new era with the way, the kinds of things the congregation's looking at doing, we're going to probably be building up a little more of a formal committee structure out of that as well, and have participants. But stay tuned. I have to get a feel for what that involves, and then I'll come back to you all, and we can talk about it. So thank you.
And just as a reminder, on Sunday, October 16th, we will be having a Meet Your Committee and Volunteer Fair. So this will be a great opportunity to learn about our committees, activity, and social groups in an informal setting. Our various groups and events reflect our vision of being transformational home for liberal spirituality and a dynamic community leader in Orange County and beyond. And now Bev Huff will light our flaming chalice, the central symbol of our Unitarian Universalist heritage. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lit the flame within us. Would you now please join me in saying our covenant, followed by our song of affirmation? Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another.
Into this home we bring our hunger for awakening. We bring compassionate hearts and a will toward justice. Into this home we bring courage to walk on after hard losses. Into this home we bring joy and gratitude for ordinary blessings. By our gathering here, we bless this place. And in its shelter, we know ourselves blessed. Worship, it's an opportunity to reflect on some of the challenges and the great joys of our lives. No one has written messages to share today, but there are several candles lit to commemorate those milestones. So I want to invite you to join in reading our congregational response for the people who have lit those candles tenderly. For your joys, we join you in celebration. For your sorrows and concerns, may you feel our compassion. For all that is spoken and unspoken, may the caring of our beloved community sustain you. And now I have a story for those young and young at heart, if you want to join me up front. So there's a lot of room over here. So I understand in your classes, you guys are learning about world religions. Is that right? Yes, this is Frog and Toad. This isn't quite world religions, but it's almost as good. So you've learned all sorts of different stories from different religions. I know the middle schoolers were going to learn about Jonah. There are all sorts of great stories. That's today. Okay. But stories are important because stories sort of help us know who we are, and they bring us hope and comfort. So this is a story about friends telling each other a story. One day in summer, Frog was not feeling well. Toad said, "Frog, you're looking quite green." "But I always look green," said Frog. "I'm a frog." "Today you look very green, even for a frog," said Toad. "Here, get into bed and rest." So Toad made Frog a cup of hot tea. Frog drank the tea, and then he said, "Tell me a story while I'm resting." "All right," said Toad. "Let me think of a story to tell you." And Toad thought and thought, but he couldn't think of a story to tell Frog. "I'll go outside and walk on the front porch," said Toad. "Perhaps that will help me think of a story." So Toad walked up and down on the porch for a long time, but he still couldn't think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad went into the house and stood on his head. "Why are you standing on your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I stand on my head, it will help me think of a story," said Toad. So Toad stood on his head for a long time, but he couldn't think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad poured a glass of water on his head. "Why are you pouring water on your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I pour water over my head, it'll help me think of a story," said Toad. Toad poured many glasses of water over his head, but he couldn't think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad banged his head against the wall. "Why are you banging your head against the wall?" asked Frog. "Well, I hope if I bang my head against the wall hard enough, it will help me think of a story," said Toad. "I feel much better now, Toad," said Frog. "I don't think I need a story anymore." "Then you get out of bed and let me get into bed," said Toad, "because I feel terrible." Frog said, "Would you like me to tell you a story, Toad?" "Yes," said Toad, "if you know one." "Once upon a time," said Frog, "there were two good friends, a frog and a toad. The frog was not feeling well. He asked his friend the toad to tell him a story. The toad couldn't think of a story. He walked up and down on the porch, but he couldn't think of a story. He stood on his head, but he couldn't think of a story. He poured water over his head, but he couldn't think of a story. He banged his head against the wall, but still he couldn't think of a story. Then the toad did not feel so well, and the frog was feeling better. So Toad went to bed, and the frog got up and told him a story. The end. "How was that, Toad?" said Frog. But Toad did not answer. He had fallen asleep. Here ends our story about stories among friends. You guys have a good class, and I'll see you in a little bit. Our reading this morning comes from Carl Sandburg. It seemed appropriate for our focus on resilience. He writes, "Give me hunger, O you gods that sit and give the world its order. Give me hunger, pain, and want. Shut me out with shame and failure from your doors of gold and fame. Give me your shabbiest, weariest hunger. But leave me a little love. A voice to speak to me in the day end. A hand to touch me in the dark room, breaking the long loneliness. In the dusk of day shapes, blurring the sunset. One little wandering western star, thrust out from the changing shores of shadows. Let me go to the window, watch there the day shapes of dusk, and wait and know the coming of a little love." Here ends our reading. Let us join in a short time of silent meditation. Namaste. Amen, and blessed be. As religious folks, we're expected to be able to talk about hope. Part of me wishes I could say, it's all part of God's plan, or just set your sights on heaven. Those answers don't always cut it with Unitarian Universalists, though. If we want hope, most of us have to look for it here, on the ground, in the midst of our very human lives. And hope doesn't fall into our laps. Hope is something that we choose over and over again. As people of faith, we make a habit of finding hope, and we make a discipline of sharing the hope that we find, even when it's an unpopular opinion. I don't know about you, but I am utterly exhausted with the election coverage in the news. And I remind my friends who also live here in California how grateful we should be that we don't live in a swing state. Or we would be hearing 3 times as much. And it's not just annoying, it's actually depressing. The fact that global warming and racial profiling are debatable in a presidential campaign is disturbing. And then there's the global refugee crisis that we haven't seen since World War II. And the violence and mistrust between law enforcement and communities of color seems to be getting worse month by month. This morning I want to talk about hope, not to distract us from the problems, but as an opportunity to reconnect with the inspiration to engage with those problems. Hope isn't a denial. Hope is fuel for our soul to keep living and to keep offering love whenever and wherever we're able. A lot of us UUs find hope in nature. We're familiar with Henry David Thoreau's little story of going to the pond. And Beatrix Potter was a lonely little girl. She dealt with that by making friends with the little animals in the woods where she lived. For centuries, Unitarian Universalists have found hope in nature, and a lot of us will do that next weekend at camp. I'm going to talk more about nature next week, but today I want to talk about our own creativity and how that brings hope into the world. We UUs are a very curious people. Some of us are very studious. Actually, we have a bunch of scientists and engineers in this congregation now that I think about it. Like crazy, brilliant, smart people. We're studious. Some might even call us bookish. If we're honest, we get a little stuck in facts and figures sometimes. We forget that there are other ways to see the world, other ways of expressing ourselves. For most of us, hope isn't the fruit of a mathematical equation. I'm sure for some it is. I'm not one of you. For most of us, hope is a stirring of the soul. It comes from our heart as well as our mind. So one of my many sabbatical adventures this past summer was going home to Tulsa, to the congregation where I grew up. We celebrated the All Souls Children's and Youth Choir 40th anniversary. Now, this is a huge church with around 1,800 members. I think they have seven different choirs that I know of. 3 of those choirs are for children and youth. It's a huge program that started 40 years ago. And I sang with that choir at every opportunity that I could for 12 years, from first grade until I graduated from high school. And going back to this reminded me how powerful music was in the formation of my own faith. I'm sure it depends on personality type, but it seems to me that music and poetry and art are far more convincing than statistics when it comes to faith. The arts reorient our awareness. They insist that we pause and pay attention to the magic in our midst. Singing in that choir, one of the ways that happened was through absorbing the lyrics of the songs. Now, those music directors and the ministers were very intentional. They selected songs with really core Unitarian Universalist theology. We sang about the beauty of nature and the power of love. We sang about mystery and hope and the triumph of the human spirit. And teaching children music, I now understand, is not a fast or simple project. Now, as an adult, I have a much deeper appreciation for their patience. And we rehearsed this music twice a week. We learned everything by heart. We memorized everything before we performed it. And memorizing probably isn't even the right word, because those songs seep in when you sing them season after season. As part of this choir reunion, those who came from really all over the country sang 8 pieces of music together. There was only one rehearsal on Saturday before we performed. I hadn't sung most of these songs in 20 years. But at rehearsal, we were all a little shocked when we realized that we knew every single word of these songs from 20 years ago or more. So as you listen to music from our choir, or anywhere really, listen to the words, of course, but listen to the words and imagine practicing that song for hours, not just the one time you hear it, so that those words seep into the singer's soul. Music has a tremendous power to instill a sense of hope for those who sing it or play it. Our hunger for beauty and the gift of human creativity can be a tremendous source of hope. One of my favorite pieces of writing, and I know I've shared this here, is an essay by Bell Hooks. It's called Beauty Laid Bare, Aesthetics in the Ordinary. In that essay, she calls us to be aware of the beauty that surrounds us every day, because she believes that if we fill our lives with beauty that's life-affirming, beauty that comes from nature and gives back to nature, then our constant yearning for more will be curbed. She writes, "Beauty can be and is present in our lives, irrespective of class status. Learning to see and appreciate the presence of beauty is an act of resistance and a culture of domination." Bell Hooks calls her grandmother a style radical. She writes, "As a quilt maker, my grandmother was constantly creating new worlds, discovering new patterns, different shapes. To her, it was the uniqueness of the individual body, look, and soul that mattered." I love that. Finding beauty in the world is a defiant act of hope. And it's something that takes practice. We also have a handful of photographers in our congregation. And I think photography probably depends on this discipline of recognizing beauty the most. We know part of photography is manipulating a camera and processing those pictures through chemicals or now through a computer and software. But long before a camera comes out of a bag, a photographer pays attention to his world. He stumbles upon arrangements of light and objects that catch the attention. Maybe it's a pattern or a color, perhaps a face with a particular expression, or the perfect lighting that showcases nature. A photographer's real task is to be aware of the visual world, to recognize beauty in unlikely places. Developing that skill is a commitment to hope. Art isn't all kittens and fluffy clouds, though. Sometimes art calls our attention to the pain of life. Sometimes the most powerful pieces are about unrequited love, or death, or even war. Pretty terrible topics show up in art. One of the best examples that I could think of from this was Billie Holiday's song, Strange Fruit. You may be familiar with it. It's based on a 1937 poem by Abel Meeropol. I want to read those words for you. Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood at the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolias pure and fresh, then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here's a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the tree to drop. Here is a strange and bitter crop. Her regular record company refused to record that song, so she went to another label. In 1939, she recorded Strange Fruit. It sold over 1 million copies and became her single most popular recording. The lyrics are powerful to us now, but imagine how this song resonated with an African American audience in the 1940s. So what does this have to do with hope? Quite a bit, actually. For one, it let Black people know that the horror of their experience was not a secret. Artfully and clearly describing lynchings, Strange Fruit pushed back against the dehumanization of a whole community and the silencing of their community. The song refused to let lynching be the end of the story. And the bravery of Billie Holiday to sing that song to public audiences must have been an inspiration to other people. Even when they reflect the horrible realities of life, music and art are vital, necessary, irreplaceable sources of hope. Music and art take hope beyond reason. They take hope beyond the logic of our heads and plant it into our hearts. All of these forms of art help us tell our story. They help us remember who we are and to share that story. A well-told story can open our minds and our hearts to new depths. And we all know all cultures have stories about who they are, who their leaders were. A lot of us are familiar with the Greek and Roman mythology. The Hebrew Bible is really a collection of the story of a way a people came together and their leaders. Whether literal or mythical, stories give us an anchor. They help us understand how we fit in this big, overwhelming world. And we UUs have a pretty fantastic story as well. Stories of how we came to be here. From a magical moment of creation, of something out of nothing, in crazy times of chaos and violence, we know that in an impossibly unlikely turn of events, one of the billions of stars had one planet that had the right ingredients, including heat from the sun, so that life began to emerge. But it was so simple back then, we'd hardly call it life. But it was the beginning of something new, something mysterious. Life. Living, breathing, cooperating cells, and life began to organize itself into more and more complex systems through millennia of cooperation and struggle. It organized itself into something so complicated that it learned to love and to know itself and to know that its very existence was the most unlikely of miracles. It's a fascinating and hopeful story that we have. We inherit an unbelievable story of cooperation and a healthy dose of good luck. And yes, there is science in there. There's also a lot of storytelling and imagination. The Big Bang, the spans of time, the distances are way beyond our ability to describe, in fact. So we fill in as well as we can. We tell a story. Beyond mathematical equations and sterile facts, our human creativity translates our world into something hopeful. In stories, music, visual art, creativity draws our attention to the beauty and the resilience of life around us. You may be thinking, well, that's all well and good, but I'm not a photographer or a songwriter. I don't have that kind of talent. Well, that's a poor excuse to not engage in art for two different reasons. The first is that you don't have to make the art to be a part of it. Be the listener, be the viewer, be the financial sponsor or the person who wonders at that vision. Be the person that invites friends with you to the show. Be the person that buys art supplies for your grandchildren instead of video games. You don't have to make the art to be a part of it. And the other reason that there's no excuse not to be involved is that talent is really kind of optional. Talent is optional, I promise. You can do a whole lot with limited talent. One of the really remarkable pieces of that amazing children's choir is that everyone was welcome to participate. There were some really strong singers. In fact, some of them went on to have professional careers in music. Others never learned to read music, and they didn't have the voice of an angel, let's say. But we learned to make music together, and that's part of the hope. It's sort of like practicing on a sports team. You work together to reach your goal. In choral singing, you learn to listen closely to the person next to you, and you learn to have the courage to sing out, which is sometimes scary. And every great once in a while, with a lot of work and a little bit of luck, there's a transcendent moment of real beauty. But the hope that you create isn't about the perfection of your art. It's more about building enough courage to try to do it. Hope is a practice. It takes courage and support. This is a beautiful day for our community. Around us, though, there seems to be a pretty intense level of pessimism in the world. From the daily news, we hear stories of violence and theft and environmental degradation and lots of bigotry. It's very easy to think that everything is going to hell in a handbasket, honestly. But my biggest fear isn't about the environment or militarism or fragile hope or fragile democracy. Sorry. My biggest fear is a pervasive sense of pessimism. A sense that there's no answer for the problems that we face. I fear that we've lost a good deal of faith. And not faith in God, but faith in the power of our love and compassion to make a difference. When we lose our faith, we also lose our courage to risk trying. Beyond well-reasoned arguments and detailed statistical analysis, art offers us a different kind of truth, an invitation to keep trying. Art and music have the capacity to inspire hope in our hearts, and not just in our heads. I can tell you I've read countless books about theology, I've read humanist attempts to inspire hope through science and reason. Still, the music that I sang in church 20 years ago shaped my core beliefs more than anything that I've read since. Long before I picked up a philosophy or a theology book, music instilled in me a hopeful Unitarian Universalist faith. And that may just be the way I am wired, but I think it's worth a try for everyone. Amen.
We extinguish this flame, knowing the light remains in the warmth and compassion of our hearts until we are together again.
Would you take the hand of someone near you for just a moment for these closing words? As we weather the winds of change, may we have wisdom to cherish moments of stillness. As we recollect times of challenge and of pain, may we remember also the blessings of our lives. As we look to future unknowns, may we have the boldness to trust that there is unimagined good yet to come. Now go in peace and let the light within you be a blessing to the world.